Today, let us begin the first part of civil disobedience in India, covering the years from 1930 to 1934. Firstly, the origin of civil disobedience. In 1846, the American writer Henry David Thoreau went to jail for a night because he refused to pay a tax. 3 years later, however, he had clearly not forgotten about the night he spent in jail, so he published an essay called Civil Disobedience. The original title of that essay was Resistance to Civil Government. Now, this gave a name to non-violent resistance to unjust laws and government policies. Gandhi was also inspired by this essay. He even translated it during his time in South Africa, implemented it in his protests there, and during the course of the freedom movement, utilized it against the British. So the term civil disobedience means the active and the professed refusal of a citizen to obey certain laws, demands, or commands which is not acceptable to them. So any civil disobedience movement has to be non-violent to be called civil. Otherwise, it just becomes like any other protest movement across the world. It may be a little impractical and a little unreasonable for the uneducated masses to follow. However, this formed the basis, the theory, and the core belief of Gandhi that every successful resistance or every successful movement has to have a basis in non-violence. And as we remember, Gandhi did not compromise on non-violence. While he was in prison, he reflected and said, God has been abundantly kind to me. In a way, he was somehow accepting the fact that the Indians were perhaps not ready and perhaps not understanding the true meaning of non-violence. And God had spoken clearly to him through Chauri Chaura. However, he got sick inside the prison, and the British probably released him because they thought that if he passed away or if he died in the jail, it could create more problems. However, even after his release, he had withdrawn from political life. He was content to live his life in his Sabarmati ashram, but he could not ignore the suffering of the masses in rural India. Rural distress is a fact of life that was in the past and it's still relevant today. Somehow we tend to forget that most of India lives in the villages and in the rural areas. The middle class, or let us say the urban middle class, are somehow a very privileged and a small minority of Indians. And we need to remember that those of us in the cities and towns, we always have our roots in the villages and in the rural parts of India. At some point of time, through the accident of fate, we had migrated or we had left the villages and come to the cities and towns. So the events leading up to civil disobedience. Within the Congress itself, there were many internal debates and dissensions and disagreements that were ongoing. As we know, the moderates and the extremists didn't really see eye to eye, didn't really get along on so many issues. Some leaders were tired of the struggles, of the protests. They wanted to get back to electoral politics, join the provincial councils. Provincial councils, by the way, had been set up under the Government of India Act of 1919, just after the First World War. They said, let us have some more representation of Indians in the provincial councils. In a way, it was offering them a little bit of a carrot. They were a little tired of giving them the stick. So leaders like C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru formed the Swaraj Party within the Congress. They wanted to return to electoral or council politics. The younger leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, they wanted nothing to do with the British. They wanted more radical mass agitations and for full independence. At the same time, the whole world was under an economic depression or the Great Economic Depression. Now, this continued and the effects were felt worldwide, including India and more so in rural India. So by 1930, the countryside, the villages, rural India was in turmoil. People were suffering. Somehow Gandhi, although he had withdrawn from politics, could not ignore this, or he could not shrug off his responsibilities. So he returned and took up active politics again. At the same time, the British also set up a commission under Sir John Simon. This is commonly known as the Simon Commission. What was this commission trying to do? It was just set up to suggest changes in the functioning of the constitutional system and just make recommendations or maybe give a little bit of advice to the government. And this commission, by the way, did not have a single, not one Indian member. So the Indians welcomed this Simon Commission with the slogan of "Go back." Go back, Simon, or Simon, go back. This was a very harsh and a very blunt message given to the British. Now, all parties, including the Congress and the Muslim League, participated in these demonstrations. When the Viceroy of India at that time, Lord Irwin, to cool things down, he announced a very vague offer for a round table conference to discuss a future constitution. The Congress were not interested and they were not satisfied and they boycotted the first round table conference. Now, during the course of the protest against the Simon Commission, a very senior leader of the Congress Party, Lala Lajpat Rai, was assaulted, beaten by the British police and unfortunately died. This would have also hurt the Congress and it reinforced their belief that nothing short of independence would be satisfactory to them. So regarding the first round table conference, it did take place and leaders of various political parties except the Congress took part and the princely states were also represented. However, the demands and the expectations of the Indians were disappointed. A very few and a very minimal offer were given. India was to develop into a federation or more powers to the states, certain safeguards for defense and finance, other departments were to be transferred. This was all on paper and nothing to implement this was done in practice. So civil disobedience continued and was planned to be made more effective. Purna Swaraj or complete or 100% independence was a demand put forward in December 1929. This happened at the Lahore session of the Congress. Jawaharlal Nehru was the president and he was getting more assertive at that time. And the liberals and the moderates had also realized that perhaps working together with the British was really not a very good idea. It was declared that 26th January 1930 would be celebrated as the Independence Day, and people were to take a pledge to struggle for complete independence. However, much to the disappointment of the leaders of the national movement, the celebrations attracted very little attention. In earlier classes, we had discussed that the idea of freedom or even the idea of India means different things to different people in different areas. India is a very diverse country. Here comes Gandhi, and once again, the genius of Gandhi is that he could find a way to relate this idea of freedom. This was an abstract idea or something that was unknown or perhaps not properly understood by the masses of India. He found a way to relate this idea to a more simple, a more practical issue of everyday life, and that was salt. The salt satyagraha or the salt march or the Dandi march is something I will take up in the next class. It is better to study it and discuss it in detail. After all, history should not be taken in bits and pieces. There are so many stories and events that we need to understand and appreciate as students of history. So that is something I will discuss in detail in the next class. However, let us look at what actually was said and what was the pledge taken on 26th January 1930 at Lahore. We believe that it is the inalienable right of the Indian people, as of any other people, to have freedom and to enjoy the fruits of their toil and have the necessities of life, so that they may have full opportunities of growth. We believe also that if any government deprives the people of these rights and oppresses them, the people have a further right to alter it or to abolish it. The British government in India has not only deprived the Indian people of their freedom, but has based itself on the exploitation of the masses and has ruined India economically, politically, culturally, and spiritually. We believe, therefore, that India must sever the British connection and attain Purna Swaraj or complete independence.